The scent of pine needles and wood smoke hit me the moment I stepped out of the taxi, a familiar perfume that smelled more like home than any memory of my childhood bedroom. I stood for a moment on the cracked pavement of my parents' driveway, the cold December air sharp in my lungs, savoring the profound, almost shocking quiet. For the past 6 months, my world had been a hermetic seal of filtered air, the constant low hum of server farms, and the tense silence of an operations center, where the only sounds were the clicking of keys and the occasional terse, professional update. This suburban stillness, broken only by the distant bark of a dog and the rustle of a breeze through bare branches, felt like a physical weight being lifted from my shoulders. I hauled my duffel bag, a sturdy, nondescript olive green affair that had seen more countries than most people I knew, and my smaller, heavier laptop case, which had seen nothing but a single, windowless room, up the familiar flagstone path. The porch light was on, a warm yellow glow against the creeping twilight, and through the front window, I could see the multicolored twinkle of the Christmas tree. It was a picture of domestic peace, a scene I'd carried in my mind like a talisman during the long, draining hours of my deployment. It was good to be back. The thought was a simple, unadorned truth. The front door swung open before I could reach for the knob. My mother, Carol, stood there, wiping her hands on a checkered apron, her face breaking into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes, crinkling the corners. "Evelyn," she said, her voice soft with emotion. She didn't rush to hug me, she never did. It was a small thing I'd always appreciated, her understanding that I needed a moment to transition, to shed the invisible armor. She simply held the door wide, an open and accepting silence. "Hi, Mom." I stepped inside, the warmth of the house enveloping me. The air was rich with the smells of roasting turkey and baking pie, a symphony of holiday normality. "Let me look at you," she said, her perceptive eyes scanning my face. I knew what she saw. The same Captain Evelyn Reed, 29 years old, hair pulled back in a simple, practical ponytail, posture perhaps a bit too rigid for the family living room. But I also knew she saw more. She always did. Her gaze lingered on the faint shadows under my eyes, the tight set of my jaw that I hadn't yet managed to relax. "You look tired, honey." "It was a long flight," I said, the standard, acceptable excuse. The deployment had ended 48 hours ago, but the transition was more than just crossing time zones. It was a decompression, a slow and careful process of re-inhabiting my own skin. My father, Robert, emerged from the kitchen, a newspaper tucked under his arm. He was a tall man, though he seemed to have shrunk a little since my last visit, his retired teacher's posture softening into a more comfortable slump. "There's our soldier," he said, his voice a low rumble. He clasped my shoulder, a firm paternal gesture. He smelled of pipe tobacco and old books, a scent as constant as the house itself. "Good to have you home, Evie." The use of my childhood nickname was a deliberate gesture of welcome, and I felt a pang of affection for him. "Good to be home, Dad." "Marcus is running late, as usual," Mom said, her tone light, but I caught the faint note of apprehension she couldn't quite hide. She was already preparing for the inevitable, playing the peacemaker before the first shot was even fired. Some last-minute showing. You know how real estate is. I nodded, placing my bags at the foot of the stairs. "No problem." And for a moment it was. For a moment, it was just the three of us, and the quiet understanding, however incomplete, was enough. I carried my bags up to my old room. It was a time capsule, preserved with a loving, if slightly wistful hand by my mother. The lavender walls, the bookshelf still lined with young adult novels and high school science fair trophies, the faded poster of the solar system tacked to the door. It was the room of a girl who loved clear answers, tangible problems with defined solutions. The irony was not lost on me. I set the heavy laptop case down with particular care on the desk, my fingers brushing the cool, reinforced metal casing. That case contained the tools of my trade, a world of abstract threats and digital battlefields that would make no sense to the girl who had once lived in this room. From a side pocket on my duffel, I retrieved a small, velvet-covered box. Inside, nestled against the dark fabric, was a distinguished service medal. The ribbon was a striking pattern of blue, gold, and red. There was no inscription on the back that wasn't classified, no citation I could read aloud. It was a secret victory, an honor I had received in a sterile conference room miles underground, with a handshake from a stern-faced general and a warning about operational security. I couldn't display it. I couldn't even tell my family I'd received it. I held the box for a moment, the weight of the metal insignificant compared to the weight of the silence that surrounded it, then tucked it into the back of my underwear drawer, a hidden treasure with no one to share it with. The sound of the front door slamming shut and a loud, familiar voice echoing through the house announced Marcus's arrival. The brief respite was over. "Hey, everyone. Sorry I'm late, but you will not believe the commission on this new commercial property." His voice trailed off as I came down the stairs. Marcus, at 32, had the easy, polished charm of a man who made his living winning people over. He was handsome, dressed in a sharp blazer that seemed too formal for a family dinner, his smile a brilliant practice thing. "Evelyn," he boomed, pulling me into a hug that was just a little too tight, a little too performative. "Look at you, still sporting the G.I. Jane vibe, I see. I almost didn't recognize you without a stack of paperwork in front of you." And there it was, the opening salvo disguised as a jovial greeting. I extricated myself, offering a thin smile. "Hello, Marcus." Dinner was a beautifully set affair, my mother's best china laid out on the lace tablecloth. The conversation started easily enough, with my parents asking polite, surface-level questions about my trip home. I gave them the sanitized version. The flight was fine, the weather had been clear, it was good to be back stateside. Marcus, however, was like a heat-seeking missile locked onto a target. After a few glasses of my father's good Cabernet, he leaned back in his chair, his smile taking on a razor's edge. "So, Evie, another 6 months protecting our nation from the comfort of an air-conditioned office," he began, his tone dripping with mock gravity. "You'll have to tell us all about the horrors of, what was it this time? A paper jam in the classified printer? A particularly stubborn spreadsheet?" My father chuckled softly, a low, rumbling sound. My mother focused intently on cutting her turkey. "It's a bit more involved than that, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice even, analytical. It was the tone I used when briefing a skeptical superior. "Cyber warfare isn't about pushing papers, it's about defending critical infrastructure." "Infrastructure," Marcus repeated, waving his fork. "Right, like the power grid, I get it. So you sit at a desk, stare at a screen, and if you see a bad guy, you what? Send him a strongly worded email?" He laughed, looking to our parents for validation. "I'm just joking, Evie. But seriously, Dad, you should see the security system I'm installing in my new condo. State of the art. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. Now that's tangible security. You can see it. You can touch it." Robert Reed nodded thoughtfully. "That does sound impressive, son. A man's home is his castle." The comment, so innocently delivered, felt like a physical blow. It wasn't that my father meant to belittle me, he simply lived in a world of concrete realities. A wall was a wall. A lock was a lock. How did one quantify the prevention of a catastrophe that never happened? How did you explain the intellectual and emotional toll of tracking an invisible enemy through layers of code? Of engaging in silent, high-stakes battles, where the only evidence of victory was the continued, uninterrupted humming of the systems Marcus took for granted. "What we do is tangible, in its own way," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Preventing a blackout or a financial collapse is just as real as responding to one." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Marcus said, his tone patronizing. "It's just, not exactly storming the beaches of Normandy, is it? No dirt, no grit, all just ones and zeros." He took a sip of wine. "No offense, I'm glad you've got a safe job. Really, it saves Mom from worrying." And there it was, the core of his insecurity, dressed up as brotherly concern. My safe desk job was his counterbalance to his own perceived lack of prestige. He couldn't boast of serving his country, so he diminished my service until it fit a narrative where his commercial success made him the family's real achiever. My mother's eyes met mine across the table. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't engage. It's not worth it." I took a slow breath, the calming technique I used before a difficult briefing. "The nature of conflict has evolved, Marcus. The battlefield is everywhere now." "Evie's right, son," my father said, ever the pragmatist. "History shows that warfare is always changing, from spears to gunpowder to computers." He said the last word with a hint of uncertainty, as if still trying to reconcile the concept. He was trying to be fair, but his understanding only went so far. He could grasp the theory, but not the grinding, daily reality. The conversation shifted, mercifully, to Marcus's latest deals. He held court, recounting tales of difficult clients and triumphant closings, his confidence buoyed by the wine and the unchallenged narrative of the evening. I retreated into silence, pushing my food around my plate. The roasted turkey, which had smelled so comforting an hour ago, now tasted like ash. I was a ghost at the table, present in body but my mind miles away, back in the ops center, where my work was understood, where my value was not a subject for debate. Later, after the dishes were cleared and my father had fallen asleep in his armchair watching the news, I helped my mother dry the good plates in the kitchen. The silence between us was comfortable, filled only by the clink of porcelain and the running water. "He doesn't mean it, you know," she said softly, not looking at me as she scrubbed a roasting pan. "He's just Marcus." "I know what he means," I replied, watching the patterns in the lace tablecloth through the kitchen doorway. "He means that what he does is real, and what I do is a mystery he can make fun of." She sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "He's proud of you, Evelyn, in his own way, he just doesn't know how to show it. And your father, he's from a different time. He reads about wars in books. It's hard for him to understand one fought with a keyboard." "It's not a war of keyboards, Mom," I said, the frustration finally leaking into my voice, sharp and brittle. "It's a war of wills, of intelligence. It's just as draining, just as real. More real in some ways because the enemy could be anyone, anywhere." I stopped myself, the words tasting dangerously close to a breach of protocol. I couldn't tell her about the sleepless nights, the adrenaline crash after a close call, the psychological weight of knowing a single mistake on my part could have consequences measured in megawatts or millions of dollars. I couldn't describe the unique isolation of carrying secrets so heavy they felt like physical burdens. She turned off the water and dried her hands, turning to face me. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as mine, were full of a deep, intuitive sympathy. "I know it is, honey. I see it in your face when you come home. It's in the way you hold your shoulders. You don't have to tell me what you do for me to know that it's important and that it takes a piece of you every time." Her words were a balm, but they couldn't completely heal the sting of the public dismissal. Her quiet intuition was a private validation, and right now, the public narrative, the one crafted by Marcus and tacitly accepted by my father, felt overwhelmingly loud. I retreated to my room soon after, pleading jet lag. It wasn't a complete lie. The fatigue was bone deep, a compound of travel, time zones, and emotional attrition. I changed into an old t-shirt and sweatpants, the civilian clothes feeling strangely unfamiliar against my skin. Outside my window, the neighborhood was dark and peaceful. A car rolled by slowly, its headlights cutting a temporary swath through the night. Somewhere, a family was watching television. Somewhere, a grid was humming, a financial network was settling its daily transactions. A government agency was operating securely. I opened the drawer and took out the metal box again, holding it in my palm. The cool velvet was a poor substitute for the understanding I craved. The chasm between my two lives felt wider than ever. Here, in this house of tangible things and simple narratives, I was just Evelyn, Marcus's oddly quiet sister with the mysterious desk job. Out there, in the world of shadows and signals, I was Captain Reed, an officer trusted with the nation's digital frontiers. The two versions of me couldn't seem to coexist under this roof. I placed the metal back in its hiding place and closed the drawer. The hook of the chapter's end wasn't a dramatic event or a shocking revelation. It was the quiet, crushing weight of resignation. The understanding that this was the pattern, and for now, I lacked the words, the permission, and perhaps even the energy to break it. The welcome home I had envisioned had been replaced by the same old story, and I was too tired to fight it. The battle for understanding, it seemed, was a conflict I was nowhere near prepared to wage. The air in the operations center was a controlled substance, chilled to a temperature that kept both the servers and the analysts sharp. It smelled of recycled air, stale coffee, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the humming racks of equipment. My world had narrowed to the glow of 3 monitors, a river of data packets flowing across them in an endless, silent stream. My fingers danced across the keyboard, not with frantic energy, but with the precise, economical movements of a concert pianist. Each command was intentional, a surgical incision into the digital veil someone was trying to weave. Source is obfuscating through a botnet, I said, my voice low but clear in the quiet room. They're bouncing the C2 traffic through residential IPs in 3 different time zones. It's a smokescreen. Dr. Eris Thorne stood behind my left shoulder, a silent presence. I could feel the weight of his focus. The payload. Still encrypted, but the beaconing pattern matches the Kestrel campaign we dissected last quarter. They're probing for vulnerabilities in the logistics grid. I highlighted a section of code on the central screen, a seemingly innocuous line that contained a malicious elegance I'd learned to recognize. See this? It's a polymorphic key generator. Changes its signature with every ping. Standard stuff, but the implementation is cleaner than before. They're learning. Eris leaned in, his glasses reflecting the lines of code. They always are. Can you map the full infection path before it achieves lateral movement? I was already doing it, my mind working in parallel tracks, tracing the digital footprints, analyzing the code structure, anticipating the adversary's next move. This was the heart of it. Not the Hollywood version with explosions and shouted commands, but this silent, cerebral chess game played out in lines of logic and misdirection. The stakes were just as high. A successful breach here could mean cascading failures in systems that moved goods, powered homes, secured data. But the battle was fought with intellect, not infantry. I have the primary and secondary nodes isolated, I said, after a few minutes of concentrated work, my hands never stilling. The protocol they're attempting to exploit is outdated, but it's still active in a few legacy systems. I'm building a digital antibody, a signature that will quarantine the traffic before it can execute. Good, the Air Force doesn't need a freight management system crippled because some contractor forgot to patch a 10-year-old vulnerability. Eris placed a hand on the back of my chair. I'll inform the watch commander. Excellent work, Evelyn, as always. There was a quiet pride in his voice, a validation that was both professional and personal. He understood the language of this war. As he moved away, my work phone, the black, ruggedized device reserved for official use, remained silent. But my personal phone, sitting on the corner of the desk, lit up with a soft glow. Mom. The shift was jarring. One moment I was holding a thread of digital malice in my hands, preventing a potential catastrophe with a few hundred lines of code. The next, I was just a daughter, a sister, the subject of a different, more insidious kind of narrative. I let the call go to voicemail, my focus snapping back to the screen to finalize the containment protocol. The mission came first. It always did. An hour later, the immediate threat neutralized and the after-action report filed, I sat in the stark quiet of my small office. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar, hollowed-out fatigue. I picked up my personal phone and listened to my mother's message. "Hi, honey, just calling to check in. Hope you're having a good day." Her voice was warm, but there was a tentative note underneath. "We had dinner with Aunt Sarah and Uncle Frank last night. Marcus was there, of course, holding court." A soft sigh traveled through the speaker. He was telling everyone about his new listing, that big commercial property out on the bypass. Your father was so proud. But then, well, you know how Marcus gets. He started in again about how nice it must be for you to have a desk job now, safe from all the real action. Aunt Sarah said she always knew you were the smart one, that it was good you found a place to use your brain without getting your hands dirty. She paused again, and I could picture her, probably in the kitchen, twisting the phone cord around her finger like she always did when she was anxious. I wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you can, sweetie. Love you." The phone felt heavy in my hand. The frustration was a physical thing, a cold stone settling in my stomach. Safe, desk job, without getting your hands dirty. The words were like a photograph taken from a bad angle, a distorted image that bore only a passing resemblance to the truth. I had just spent the morning dissecting a cyberweapon aimed at critical infrastructure, a weapon that could cause more tangible, widespread damage than any single physical bomb. My hands might be clean, but my mind felt stained, carrying the fingerprints of every threat I had to analyze and dismantle. I didn't call her back immediately. I couldn't. The calm, analytical demeanor I wore like a uniform felt thin, stretched taut over a rising tide of resentment. I went through the motions of the rest of the day, the high of the successful operation completely erased by the poison of Marcus's casual belittlement. It was a different kind of attack, one for which I had no ready defense. The following afternoon, I was in a secure video teleconference with Eris and two analysts from a partner agency. We were reviewing the forensics from the previous day's incident, piecing together the attribution. It was detailed, technical work. The encryption algorithm has hallmarks of a known apt group. One of the analysts, a woman with a sharp, focused gaze, was saying. But the infrastructure they used is new. It suggests they've acquired new resources or are collaborating. I nodded, pulling up a related data set on my screen. I've cross-referenced the IP blocks with recent dark web marketplace transactions. There's a match with a bulk purchase made last month using a cryptocurrency wallet that's been linked to. My personal phone, set to silent, vibrated on the desk beside my keyboard. The screen lit up with a photo of my family, all of us squeezed together on the couch last Christmas. Marcus had his arm around me, grinning his trademark, camera-ready grin. The sight of it at that precise moment was like a spark on a gas leak. Captain Reed, are you seeing the same correlation? I blinked, dragging my focus back to the screen. The analysts were waiting. Eris was watching me, his head tilted slightly. I had missed a question. My apologies, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. Could you repeat the query? The analyst did, and I forced myself to answer, to compartmentalize. But the damage was done. My concentration was fractured. For the remainder of the call, I was acutely aware of my own performance, the need to project the unflappable competence they expected. When the screens finally went dark, I leaned back in my chair and pressed the heels of my hands against my closed eyes. A soft chime announced an incoming message on the secure system. It was from Eris. Evelyn, my office when you have a moment. It wasn't a request. I took a deep breath, straightened my uniform blouse, and walked down the sterile hallway to his office. The door was open. He was sitting behind his desk, not working, but waiting for me. Close the door, please, he said calmly. I did, taking a seat in the chair opposite him. The walls of his office were lined with books on network theory, geopolitical strategy, and history. It was the office of a scholar who happened to work in a warfighting domain. You were distracted during the VTC, he stated. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. I apologize, sir. It won't happen again. He waved a hand, dismissing the formality. Evelyn, we've worked together for 4 years. I've seen you maintain focus through 12-hour shifts, through intelligence feeds that would give most people nightmares. Something got through your armor today. That's worth noting. I looked down at my hands, clenched in my lap. I could feel the careful wall I'd built around my personal life beginning to crack under the weight of it all. The stone of frustration in my stomach felt like it was growing. It's family, I said, the words foreign on my tongue. I never talked about this. Eris waited, saying nothing. His silence was a permission slip. My brother, I started, then stopped, searching for the right way to explain a conflict that had no clear battlefield. He has this idea of what my work is, what military service should look like. He thinks because I'm not deployed to a forward base because I work with computers that it's not real, that I'm a paper pusher. The term tasted bitter. And he tells that to my whole family. My aunts, my uncles, they all think I have a safe, comfortable desk job. Eris leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. And you can't correct them. How? The word came out sharper than I meant it to. What am I supposed to say? Sorry I missed the family barbecue. I was busy preventing a cyber attack that could have disrupted the national power grid. It sounds absurd. It sounds like I'm making it up to sound important. I shook my head, the anger turning inward now, at the impossible position I was in. The secrecy is the point. It's what makes us effective, but it makes it impossible for them to see. They see the absence of risk, not the nature of it. He nodded slowly, his expression one of deep understanding. This is the burden, Evelyn. The greatest battles we fight are the ones we can't describe. The victories are silent, and the heroes are anonymous. There are no parades for a threat neutralized before it ever becomes a headline. Your family's pride is something you have to take on faith, because you will rarely, if ever, have the evidence to prove you've earned it. Hearing him articulate it so clearly was both a validation and a profound sadness. He was right. This was the chasm, not just between me and Marcus, but between my reality and the world my family lived in. They measured service in physical proximity to danger, in uniforms covered in dust. My battlefield was abstract, invisible, and because of that, to them, it was lesser. "He's not a bad person," I found myself saying, a reflexive defense of Marcus that felt hollow even as I said it. "He's just insecure. My career, what little he knows of it, makes him feel like his achievements are small." "That is his problem to solve, not yours," Eris said, his tone gentle but firm. "Your responsibility is to the mission, but your well-being is also a mission-critical asset. Carrying this frustration, this need for their understanding, it's a psychological weight. And like any weight, if you carry it for too long without setting it down, it will break you. Don't let his narrative become your truth." I left his office feeling both lighter and more burdened. His words had given shape to the formless anxiety that had been gnawing at me, but naming the problem didn't solve it. That evening, back in my quarters, I did something I rarely did. I opened my personal laptop and navigated to a public-facing military website. I typed my own name into the search bar, Captain Evelyn Reed, U.S. Air Force. The results were sparse and sterile. My official photo, in my service dress uniform, looked confident and untouchable. My bio was a masterpiece of obfuscation. Captain Reed currently serves as a cyberspace operations officer at Peterson Space Force Base. Her responsibilities include network operations and defense. It was so bland, so deliberately uninformative. There was no mention of the Joint Task Force, no hint of the classified campaigns, no whisper of the long nights in the operations center. I clicked on a news article from a local paper back home, dated from over a year ago. It was a feel-good piece about supporting troops, and it featured a picture of me, taken during a brief visit. The caption read, "Local Officer Captain Evelyn Reed home on leave. Reed, who works in an administrative capacity at a Colorado base, enjoys spending time with her family." Administrative capacity. I stared at the words until they blurred on the screen. This was the public record. This was the version of me that my family, my friends, my hometown could see. A woman in a uniform who did paperwork. Marcus wasn't creating the narrative. He was just reading from the script that the necessary secrecy of my work provided him. The system designed to protect me was also the very thing that rendered me invisible, that reduced a complex and critical defense to a simple, dismissible cliché. I closed the laptop. The silence in my room was absolute. The professional confidence I'd felt on the operations floor was still there, a solid core of certainty about my skills and my value. But it was now ringed by a cold, hard understanding. The chasm between my life and my family's perception of it wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a fundamental byproduct of my duty. And for the first time, I felt the true, corrosive weight of that distance. The pressure was building, a silent scream trapped behind a wall of regulations and secrecy, and I didn't know how much longer I could be the only one who could hear it. The air in my brother's rented backyard was thick with the smell of grilled meat and expensive perfume, a humid cocktail that clung to the inside of my lungs. Late August in Ohio had a particular weight to it, a heavy, green stillness that promised the end of something. String lights were draped like captured fireflies between the oak trees, and the laughter of Marcus's friends, a loud, confident sound, echoed across the manicured lawn. I stood near the dessert table, a neutral territory, holding a glass of champagne that was going flat in my hand. It was a prop, something to do with my fingers other than curl them into fists. 10 months. It felt like a decade and a single breath all at once. Since the last holiday season, the Kestrel campaign had evolved from a probing threat to a persistent, gnawing presence in the back of my mind. The work was a series of shadows and whispers, of tracing digital ghosts across continents. The satisfaction of that first successful countermeasure had been replaced by the grim understanding that it was only a single battle in a war with no visible front lines. Dr. Thorne's concern had deepened into a permanent furrow between his brows. My own calm felt more and more like a performance, a layer of ice over a deep, dark current. "There she is, the ghost of Christmas past," Marcus's voice boomed, cutting through the party's murmur. He slung an arm around my shoulders, a gesture that looked fraternal to anyone watching but felt, to me, like the closing of a trap. His smile was a brilliant, practiced thing, all teeth and confidence. "I was just telling everyone I had to send a search party to the airbase to dig you out of your filing cabinet." A few of his real estate buddies chuckled. I offered a thin smile, the one I reserved for briefings with generals who thought firewalls were literal walls. The filing cabinets are digital now, Marcus. Saves on paper cuts. He squeezed my shoulder a little too tightly. Right, all those spreadsheets. Seriously, folks, my little sister is the reason your flight to Florida gets delayed. She's a paperwork warrior, fighting the good fight against, what is it again, Ev? Printer jams. This was the shtick, refined and amplified for his new audience, his future in-laws, the Harpers, who stood nearby looking politely bewildered. Mr. Harper was a man who built things you could touch, houses with foundations and roofs. My world was anathema to him. Marcus, in his insecurity, had decided that the only way to elevate his own chosen path, the schmoozing, deal-making world of commercial real estate, was to diminish mine into something laughably mundane. It was a defense mechanism I'd understood since we were teenagers, but understanding it didn't make the acid drip of his words any less corrosive. Something like that, I murmured, taking a sip of the warm champagne. Come on, don't be modest, he said, steering me toward a group huddled near the oversized fire pit. This is my sister, Evelyn, he announced to a man about his age who was expertly swirling a glass of red wine. She's in the Air Force, thinks active defense means sharpening a lot of pencils. The man, whose name was Liam, laughed. Hey, someone's gotta do it, better you than me. I'd go nuts behind a desk all day. I felt a familiar numbness settle over me. This was the most public iteration of the joke yet, performed for an entire gallery of his peers. It was humiliating, but not in the way he intended. The humiliation was for him, for this sad little play he felt compelled to put on. I looked past his grinning face to where our parents stood. Dad was nodding along, a faint, confused smile on his face. He'd always been proud of my service in the abstract, but I knew he pictured me in a flight suit, not staring at lines of code. Mom's eyes met mine. Her smile was tighter, her gaze more perceptive. She saw the tension in my jaw, the way I held my glass a little too still. She always saw. The party swirled around me, a kaleidoscope of conversations about mortgage rates, stock portfolios, and vacation plans. I was an island of silence in the noise. I watched the interactions like I watched network traffic logs, looking for patterns, for anomalies. My mind, never fully off-duty, drifted to the last briefing. The adversaries were getting cleaner, more efficient. Their code was like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and deadly. It was a perverse form of artistry. I found a semi-secluded bench tucked beneath the sprawling branches of a willow tree at the far edge of the property. The din of the party softened here, replaced by the chirping of crickets. I closed my eyes for a moment, just breathing. This was the isolation Dr. Thorne worried about. The chasm between the life-and-death stakes of my work and the utter triviality of a backyard barbecue was so vast it sometimes stole my breath. A few minutes later, a couple drifted toward my bench. It was Liam, the wine enthusiast, and his wife, a sharp-eyed woman named Chloe. They weren't seeking me out, they were seeking a quiet spot, and I was already occupying it. Sorry, are we intruding? Chloe asked, her voice softer than I expected. Not at all, I said, shifting over. It's a good spot to escape the fray. Liam chuckled. Marcus's parties are always a bit of a spectacle. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. Then Chloe said, you have a very still presence. It's interesting. Most people at these things are vibrating, trying to be seen. You're just observing. I felt a flicker of alarm. Being observed was a vulnerability. Old habit, I deflected. Liam nodded. Marcus said you're in the Air Force. What do you do? I mean, really do. He makes it sound like you're an administrative assistant, but that doesn't fit. He gestured vaguely at me. The intensity doesn't match. It was a more astute observation than I was used to from Marcus's circle. I gave my standard, sanitized reply. I work in cybersecurity. It's mostly policy and infrastructure protection, not very glamorous. Cybersecurity? Chloe's interest was piqued. My firm was hit with a ransomware attack last year. It was a nightmare. Took us weeks to recover. She leaned forward. Is that the kind of thing you deal with? But like, for the government. On a different scale, but yes, the principles are similar. I was carefully constructing the wall, brick by bureaucratic brick. Liam was watching me, his head tilted. He had the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Reed, Evelyn Reed. He said my name slowly, as if tasting it. Then he pulled out his phone, his thumbs tapping rapidly on the screen. "You know, I read something the other day. A friend of mine sends me links about this kind of stuff. Thinks it's the new Cold War." My blood went cold. This was the moment I'd always dreaded, the moment the sealed, classified world I inhabited collided with the open, Googleable one. I knew exactly what he might find. Months ago, after the logistics grid incident, the Department of Defense had issued a deliberately vague, heavily redacted press release. It was a necessary piece of public reassurance, a signal to both the American people and our adversaries that we were vigilant. My name wasn't supposed to be there. But in the version that was eventually cleared for public release, a single, tantalizing detail had been left unredacted by a careless public affairs officer, the rank and last name of the lead officer on the case. Captain E. Reed. A mistake, quickly corrected in subsequent versions, but the internet never forgets. It was a ghost in the machine, a piece of data that should have been scrubbed. I saw the moment he found it. His eyes, previously curious and slightly bored, widened. The casual slouch vanished from his posture. He stared at his phone, then at me, then back at his phone. "Chloe," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Look at this." He handed her the phone. I watched her face undergo the same transformation. Her eyes scanned the small screen, her lips moving slightly as she read. I didn't need to see the article to know what it said. It would use words like sophisticated, critical infrastructure, thwarted, and catastrophic disruption prevented. It would paint a picture of a hero, a faceless, nameless hero, except for that one damning initial. Chloe looked up at me, her expression one of pure awe. "Evelyn, this is you." The silence under the willow tree was suddenly profound, broken only by the distant, oblivious laughter from the party. The anomaly in the social log had just triggered a critical alert. "It was a team effort," I said quietly, the weakest of all possible denials. "It was an admission." Liam stood up, his movements jerky with excitement. "Team effort? It says here a Captain E. Reed devised the countermeasures that neutralized a state-level cyber attack on the national logistics grid. Jesus, that was you? Marcus said you. He said you pushed paper." The news did not spread like wildfire. Fire is loud and chaotic. This spread like a gas, silent, insidious, filling every space. Liam didn't shout. He walked back to the main party, went straight to his closest friend and showed him the phone. I saw the man's jaw drop. He showed his wife. She looked over at me, her hand flying to her mouth. A hushed, intense conversation erupted. Then another. The ripple moved through the crowd, a wave of turned heads and whispered questions. The music, the laughter, it all seemed to dial down, as if someone had lowered the volume on the world. I saw Marcus first, still holding court by the fire pit, oblivious. He was telling a story, gesturing broadly, basking in the attention. Then he noticed the shift. He saw people looking past him, their focus drawn to the willow tree. He followed their gaze and found me. His smile faltered. Confusion knitted his brow. My mother reached me first. She slipped away from a conversation with Mrs. Harper and came to my side, her face pale. "Evelyn, what's happening? They're looking at you." Before I could answer, Robert joined us. His pragmatic face was creased with worry. "What's all the whispering about? Did something happen?" Then Marcus was there, his charisma replaced by a bristling irritation. "Okay, what's going on? Did you give a lecture on tax law or something? Everyone's acting weird." His joke fell flat, landing in the tense silence between us. It was Liam who answered, his voice respectful, almost reverent. He held up his phone like a holy relic. "Marcus, man, you never told us. Your sister, she's a hero." Marcus snatched the phone, his eyes scanning the article. I watched his face. I saw the initial disbelief, the quick, dismissive shake of his head. Then the words began to sink in. I saw the color drain from his face, leaving a sickly pallor. His hands, usually so expressive, trembled slightly. He read it again, his lips moving soundlessly. The article was a mirror, and he was seeing himself reflected in it. The years of belittlement, the paper-pusher jokes, the entire fragile edifice of his own superiority built on a foundation of lies. He looked up at me, and for the first time in our adult lives, I saw no mockery in his eyes. I saw a raw, stunned hurt. The humiliation wasn't mine anymore. It was his, and it was absolute. The ground had been pulled out from under him in front of everyone he wanted to impress. "This is some kind of mistake," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. It was a thin, desperate sound. "It's not a mistake, Marcus," Liam said softly. "It's from the Department of Defense." The silence stretched, becoming a physical presence. The entire party was watching us now. My father took the phone from Marcus's limp hand. He put on his reading glasses, and as he read, his shoulders straightened. The confused pride he'd always held for me sharpened, focused, becoming something real. He looked at me, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. Not his daughter, but the officer. He handed the phone to my mother. Her reaction was different. There were no questions in her eyes, only a deep, sad understanding. She hadn't needed the article. She had always known. Marcus finally found his voice, but it was cracked and strange. "I need some air." He didn't look at anyone as he turned and walked stiffly toward the house. The party began to slowly reanimate, but the tone had changed. The conversations were hushed, punctuated by glances in my direction. I saw respect, curiosity, and a tinge of fear in people's eyes. I felt like a specimen under glass. After a few minutes of standing there, trapped in a spotlight I never wanted, I excused myself and walked toward the back of the garden, away from the house, away from the eyes. I found a small stone bench near a bird bath, shrouded by hydrangea bushes. The vindication I had imagined in my weaker moments felt nothing like this. This was hollow. It was a victory that felt like a loss. The crunch of gravel announced his arrival. Marcus stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. The golden boy was tarnished. "Why," the word was ripped out of him, "why didn't you ever say anything?" I looked at him, at the genuine pain etched on his face. The anger I'd carried for years suddenly felt heavy and useless. What was I supposed to say, Marcus? "Actually, I'm not a pencil pusher. I help protect the country from cyberattacks." You would have laughed harder. You needed me to be the punchline. "So you let me make a fool of myself. For years?" His voice rose, the shame curdling into anger. "You set me up for this. You wanted this to happen." "No," I said, and my voice was tired, drained of all emotion. "I never wanted any of this. I wanted you to see me. Not my job, not my title, me. You never have. You've only ever seen a reflection of whatever insecurity you were feeling that day." He flinched as if I'd struck him. The anger evaporated, leaving behind something more vulnerable. "They're all in there," he gestured vaguely toward the party, looking at me like I'm an idiot, like I'm the asshole who didn't know his own sister was some secret agent. "I'm not a secret agent, Marcus. I'm an analyst. I'm good at my job, that's all." The simplicity of the statement hung in the humid air between us. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the ground. The sounds of the party felt miles away. "All those times I introduced you like that, my sister, the paperwork warrior." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I guess the joke S on me." "There doesn't have to be a joke," I said softly. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to build forts with me in the living room. That boy was buried under layers of ambition and insecurity, but he was still in there. "They're never going to see me the same way again," he whispered, and the confession was so raw it startled me. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about him and the fragile world he'd built. "Maybe they'll see you differently too," I said. "Maybe they'll see that you're the brother of someone who does something important. That's a reflection too, a better one." It was a small offering, a branch across the chasm that had just widened into a canyon between us. He didn't take it, but he didn't knock it away either. He just stood there, in the gathering twilight, a man whose entire understanding of his place in the world had just been unraveled by a few lines of text on a phone screen. The old dynamic was broken, shattered into 1,000 pieces on the perfectly manicured lawn. What would replace it? I had no idea. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. The leaves had begun to turn, a slow-burning fire creeping from the tips of the oaks in my parents' front yard. 2 months. It felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye since Marcus's engagement party, since the sting of his words had settled into a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. The Kestrel campaign had evolved, too, a constant, grinding pressure that made the quiet of my childhood home feel like a physical weight being lifted from my shoulders as I pulled into the driveway. The difference was palpable before I even reached the door. My mother, Carol, must have been watching from the window. She emerged onto the porch, not with her usual bustling energy, but with a quiet deliberation. She wiped her hands on the checkered dish towel she always seemed to have draped over her shoulder, a gesture so familiar it ached. But her eyes held a new expression, a kind of wary, respectful awe that made me feel like a guest in my own home. "Evelyn," she said, her voice softer than usual. She didn't rush forward for a hug but waited for me to climb the steps. When she did embrace me, it was longer, tighter, as if reassuring herself I was really there. "Hi, Mom." She pulled back, her hands resting on my shoulders, her perceptive gaze scanning my face. "You look tired, sweetheart." "It's been a long few weeks," I admitted. It was the closest I could come to the truth. The all-nighters, the endless flow of data, the psychic toll of staring into the abyss of a threat no one else could see, it all translated to a simple, acceptable tired. "Well, you're home now." She said it with a new finality, as if declaring a sanctuary. "Your father's in the study. He's been doing some reading." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She just smiled, a small, knowing thing, and ushered me inside. The house smelled of roasting chicken and old books, a scent that was the very definition of comfort. But the atmosphere was different, charged. My father, Robert, appeared in the hallway from his study, a book held loosely in one hand, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked at me not with his usual vague paternal affection, but with a focused intensity I associated with his old history lessons. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a low rumble. He nodded, a single, deliberate dip of his chin. "Good to have you home." "Thanks, Dad." An awkward silence descended, thick and heavy. The normal rhythms of our reunions, Mom's chatter, Dad's questions about the drive, the easy drift into the kitchen, were stalled. They were looking at me, waiting for something. They had seen something, or heard something. The veil of operational secrecy I wore so carefully had developed a tear. It was Marcus who broke the tension, his arrival announced by the slam of the front door. "Hey, is the prodigal daughter here? I saw the government-issue sedan out front." His tone was the same, the familiar brotherly jab, but it landed differently now. It felt forced, a performance he was struggling to maintain. He came into the living room, and our eyes met. The boisterous confidence of the engagement party was gone. He looked diminished. The memory of that night hung between us, a ghost at the table. He offered a weak smile. "Hey, Ev." "Marcus." Dinner was a quiet affair. Mom had outdone herself, chicken with rosemary and lemon, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, but the clink of cutlery against plates was louder than the conversation. We talked about the weather, the changing leaves, Mom's book club, safe, neutral territory. But I could feel my parents' glances, the unasked questions hovering in the air. Marcus mostly pushed his food around his plate, uncharacteristically subdued. After dessert, Mom began clearing the table. "Marcus, help me with these dishes." It was a transparent ploy, and we all knew it. My father cleared his throat. "Evelyn, why don't you join me in the study for a moment? I've got a question about something I was reading." I followed him, the worn Persian rug muffling our footsteps. His study was a time capsule, lined with shelves of history books, a large globe in one corner, the faint smell of pipe tobacco lingering despite his having quit years ago. He gestured to the worn leather armchair opposite his desk. I sat, feeling like I was about to be debriefed. He settled into his own chair, steepling his fingers. He looked older in the soft light of the green-shaded lamp on his desk. "Your mother and I," he began, then paused, choosing his words with a teacher's care. "We got a call last week, from a man named Dr. Thorne." I felt a jolt of surprise, quickly suppressed. Eris had called my parents? That was a breach of our unspoken professional code, a step into my personal life he would never take without grave reason. "He was very professional," my father continued, seeing the alarm in my eyes. "He assured us it was a routine check-in, part of some new support protocol for personnel in high-stress fields. He was careful, didn't say anything specific, but he did say something." My father leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "He said that the work you are doing right now is of critical national importance, that your contributions have been exceptional, that the quiet work often is the most vital." He let the words hang in the air. I could almost see Eris, in his crisp, direct way, carefully constructing that sentence to convey maximum meaning with minimal classified detail. A validation, a lifeline thrown to my family to help them understand. He used an analogy, my father said, a flicker of his old pedagogical self emerging. He said your work was like building the Maginot Line, but for a war nobody can see, a defensive perimeter in a non-physical battle space. He stumbled over the modern term, but the meaning was clear. I nodded slowly. That's a fair analogy. For my entire life, he said, his voice gaining strength, valor in service has meant something you could see. A soldier on a battlefield, a pilot in a plane, something tangible. I'll admit, Evelyn, your work has been abstract to me. Computers, codes, it felt distant. He picked up the book from his desk, a thick volume on the Cold War. But I've been reading. About the Enigma machine, about signals intelligence, about how wars are won not just with bullets but with information. With protection. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not confusion but comprehension. A historian connecting the dots across centuries. You're not a paperwork warrior, are you? The phrase, thrown back at me with such gentle gravity, was like a pinprick to an overinflated balloon. The pressure of 2 months, of a decade of quiet service, eased just a fraction. No, Dad, I'm not. He nodded, a world of understanding passing between us in that simple gesture. It wasn't a full revelation. He couldn't know the details, the sleepless nights, the constant, gnawing fear of a breach, but it was a start. It was respect. Later, as I was getting a glass of water from the kitchen, I found Marcus leaning against the counter, staring out the dark window at his own reflection. The house was quiet, our parents having retired for the night. He's really proud, you know, Marcus said without turning around. It's all he's talked about for days. Dr. Thorne, the Maginot Line. He gave a short, bitter laugh. He's prouder of you now than he was when you commissioned. I didn't say anything. I just waited, the cool tile of the floor seeping through my socks. He finally turned to face me. The charming facade was completely gone, stripped away to reveal the raw insecurity beneath. He looked exhausted. I owe you an apology, Ev. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He cut me off, his voice firm. At the party, what I said, I was an ass, a colossal, insecure ass. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not an excuse, but those people, the Harpers, they're all about surface. Who you know, what you drive, the size of your portfolio. And I was trying so hard to fit in to make them like me that he trailed off, shaking his head. I used you. I made you small to make myself feel bigger. And I'm sorry. Not for the embarrassment, but for never trying to understand. For all these years, I've treated your career like a mystery I couldn't be bothered to solve. Because it was easier than admitting that what you do, it matters. In a way that selling office space never will. The honesty was disarming. This wasn't the glib, performative apology I might have expected. This was a confession. The sibling rivalry that had defined our dynamic for so long was finally giving way to something more fragile, more adult. It does matter, I said quietly, but not in the way you might think. It's not about glory, it's not about being a hero. I searched for the simplest terms, the core truth I held onto during the darkest hours. Think of it like this, Marcus. My job is to stand guard, on a wall so high and so far away that most people don't even know it exists. I watch for things, shadows, really, that want to get in. To steal, to disrupt, to harm. And my entire job is to keep them out. To protect what's inside. The people, the systems, the everyday, your life, Mom and Dad's life. It's protection, not destruction. That's all it is. He listened, really listened, his gaze fixed on me. I saw the gears turning behind his eyes, the slow dawning of a concept so vast it was almost incomprehensible. The idea that his little sister's work was a shield that encompassed him, his world, his future. A guard on a wall, he repeated softly. He let out a long breath. All this time, I thought you were just hiding in your data. I thought you looked down on my life because it was noisy and public. But you were just doing your job, a job that's bigger than any of us. I don't look down on your life, Marcus, I said and meant it. It's just different, and that's okay. He nodded, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. The tension that had crackled between us for months dissolved, leaving a quiet, empty space that felt full of potential. Okay, he said. Okay. The next morning, we had breakfast together as a family. The conversation was still awkward, but it was an honest awkwardness, the kind that comes from rebuilding something on a new foundation. My father asked careful, considered questions about the logistical challenges of my work, using his historian's framework. My mother watched us all, a quiet, profound relief in her eyes. and Marcus passed me the toast without a sarcastic comment, just a simple, quiet nod. Driving back to base a few hours later, the world outside my car window seemed sharper, clearer. The brilliant reds and golds of the October trees were no longer just a marker of time passing, but a spectacle to be appreciated. The validation I had received from Eris, from my father, from Marcus, was a tangible thing, a warm stone in my pocket, but I knew its comfort was temporary. The work awaited. Back in the dim, climate-controlled hum of the operations center, I slid into the familiar chair before my terminal. The screens flickered to life, the endless streams of data resuming their flow. Kestrel was still there, a persistent, evolving signature in the noise. The threat hadn't changed. The pressure hadn't lessened. But something within me had shifted. I typed my access codes, my fingers moving with their usual practiced efficiency. But for the first time, the calm I projected wasn't just a performance. The mask I had worn for so long, the barrier between Captain Reed and Evelyn, felt thinner, almost transparent. It wasn't that I had been proven right to my family. It was that I no longer needed to prove anything. The quiet that surrounded me now was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of isolation, but the peace of integration. The wall I guarded was still distant, but I no longer felt alone standing watch upon it. The external noise had faded, and in its place was a simple, steady resolve. I had a job to do, and now, finally, I could just do it.